Hi, and welcome to my presentation. Thank you for attending today. I will be discussing creating and maintaining a viable fantasy world, as demonstrated in the novel Sunshine by Robin McKinley. I will be doing this by highlighting 3 language features that I feel Robin McKinley does particularly well throughout the novel. I have labelled these 3 areas of focus: nuanced language, invented slang/jargon, and lastly, the familiar and the unfamiliar. Nuanced language, in this presentation, refers to the language that's subtly geared towards a certain way of thinking, or a certain interpretation. It's not always easily recognised, but even so, it speaks to our unconscious. The reader often isn't aware that they are being manipulated and manoeuvred by the language choices in the novel. It was only on analysis of the text that I realised that right from the first page, McKinley was sowing the seeds of nuanced language for her fantasy world to grow. This is the excerpt from the opening page. Monday evening is our movie evening because we are celebrating having lived through another week. Sunday night we lock up at 11 or midnight and crawl home to die. And Monday, barring a few national holidays, is our day off. Ruby comes in on Mondays with her warrior cohort and attacks the coffee house with an assortment of high-tech blasting gear that would whack Godzilla into submission. Those single-track military minds never think to ask their cleaning staff for help in giant lethal marauding creature matters. Thanks to Ruby, Charlie's Coffee House is probably the only place in Old Town where you are safe from the local cockroaches, which are approximately the size of chipmunks. You can hear them clicking when they canter across the cobblestones outside. I have highlighted the words in this passage that I feel stand out as nuanced language. I think that these words have been chosen and worked together to produce an emerging, unsettling fantasy atmosphere. Take Godzilla and surviving cockroaches as big as chipmunks, for example. Whether the reader thinks the protagonist is exaggerating or not, it certainly emanates an atmosphere of fantastical proportions. I also want to mention how the author uses nuanced language throughout the novel for adjectives, similes, and metaphors, which help support and maintain the fantasy atmosphere. Words like troll, goblin, and dragon are just a sample of the words that illustrate how the author keeps a reader's head turned in a specific direction. And now, how can we incorporate this type of nuanced language into our own writing? I would suggest that once you have an idea for a story, or even before that, but before you start writing, immerse yourself in the language that resonates with the atmosphere you want to create. For myself, this involved writing lists of words that I felt related to the atmosphere of my story. I enjoy words, and this type of activity was no chore. It was like dipping into a well that started with one drop, and before I knew it, I had a bucket full of words from which to draw upon. It's a matter of being aware, of making that conscious language choice for a specific end. I chose to highlight invented slang/jargon because, in my opinion, McKinley excels in her use of realistic invented slang and jargon and demonstrates an acute sensitivity and awareness of language. Both explanations here on the PowerPoint define how this type of language is used by a particular group and is restricted to a particular context. The same could be said about idiom and colloquialism. These language types function in a way that create a sense of time and place. When using invented slang in the text, McKinley first establishes the context so that the new word is instinctively recognized. This slang is then repeated throughout the story, reinforcing its meaning and also the illusion that in Sunshine we are somewhere perfectly acceptable. Here are some examples of invented slang/jargon from the text. The first 2 examples are, "She'll shear, day or so," he said. "I was thinking maybe I'll talk to Kenny." "Hey, shear, this is me, okay?" The word shear has been used in a way that the word relax might be substituted. Why then doesn't McKinley simply use the word relax? Because by using unique language, she is creating a unique world. It might be a paradox, but I think the invented words, which add to the realism of the protagonist's world, also gain their real meaning from the protagonist's world. Invented expletives can also be effective in establishing an otherworldly time and place, as McKinley has done in the examples. "Please God and angels, let it be over." "Thanks to all the gods and angels for Mel." "What the dharmic hell?" The reader comprehends this language from its function in the text. Sometimes McKinley clarifies meaning of the slang or jargon, as in the example. Also, we know about the others at the coffee house, if we want to, because several of our regulars work for SOF, Special Other Forces, also known as sucker cops, since, as I say, it's chiefly the suckers they worry about. Some of the other fun slang words that McKinley has used throughout this text include sheer, Spartan, nomad, glang, totally Thor. Suggestions on how to incorporate invented slang in your own work. Start with establishing a clear context. Then have fun experimenting with language substitutions. It could be interesting to have a variation from the everyday F word. Invent words, apply new meanings to words, or use recognized words. The idea is to be aware of the effect using slang-type words has in creating a sense of time and place. In Sunshine, McKinley launches a reader's imagination from what they already know, and she does this by connecting the familiar with the unfamiliar. In the first example, guesses ranged from parakeet to Gila monster. I have no idea what a Gila monster is. The word monster is probably a hint, and it is on the opposite spectrum to a parrot. I imagine it's something large and scary. In the other two examples, McKinley has used known words, such as drugs and charms, to link them with novel words. This way, the new words have a meaning attached to them, and consequently build on the reader's knowledge of this world. Besides using familiar words to attach the unfamiliar, McKinley uses familiar grammar structures. In these two examples, McKinley has used capitalization to signal to the readers the significance of the words. Readers of English know that capitals denote proper nouns and indicate a specific person, place, or thing. I came out of it feeling wretchedly sick and shaky, and of course, scared out of my mind. They'd put some kind of breath over me. Breath has been capitalized, indicating a specific thing, and the type of thing is deduced from the previous sentence and current context. The context is vampires. This is another way McKinley uses the familiar. When she uses the word vampires, she is activating a reader's stereotypes or tropes, or relying on a reader's prior knowledge. The author may then either support or subvert expectations as she shapes the vampires in the protagonist's world. Another way to create a viable world through the familiar and the unfamiliar is to lean on familiar concepts and replicate them in the narrative world. The example, I paid for a line into the Cosworld, in context is referring to something like the World Wide Web. McKinley has invented a plethora of words associated with this familiar concept, such as GlobeNet and Combox. If we want to copy this technique and incorporate the familiar with the unfamiliar to make our fictional world believable, it helps to first ground the novel information in fact. If you've created a solid reality for your protagonist, you can attach the unfamiliar and give it context and meaning. I noticed that the use of a strong, authentic narrative voice is advantageous in helping with the believability. Use familiar grammar structures, concepts, and words to make your creativity acceptable. Here is a table that briefly summarizes the 3 language features I highlighted today that I consider work well in creating and maintaining a viable fantasy world. First, we had nuanced language, which is specially selected language for metaphor, simile, and description, that when used resonates a specific atmosphere throughout the novel. Next, invented slang/jargon. This is used accordingly in context, and in doing so evokes a certain time and place. Finally, familiar and unfamiliar. When we connect familiar concepts, words, or grammar with new unfamiliar words, it helps to ground the new information with familiar reality, making it believable. Next to the table is another excerpt from the text, which demonstrates these 3 language features in action. And now, after talking about the brilliant Robin McKinley, it's time to look at my own examples of incorporating these language features. In this example, I have made conscious choices of language that I hope are nuanced for a slightly disturbing atmosphere. I also want to unconsciously point towards the idea of serpents. I've made use of the sibilant S, and I've directly used the phrases faded snaking lines and glinted like faceted gems. It reads, even from a distance I noticed the hard glint in his eyes, and knew instinctively there was something not quite right about the new teacher, Mr. Edliv. It was summer and the sweltering start to a new school year. We were assembled in the old school hall that doubled as our sports hall for the official welcome back from the principal. The usual, hope you all had an enjoyable summer holiday. It's time to knuckle down for another academic year, and by the way, seniors, make sure you do your best in this final year and lead by example for the rest of the students. Blah, blah, blah. Though the gym equipment was currently tidied away, there was a faint odour of sweat and old gym mats that had seeped into the porous cement floor that was covered in the faded snaking lines for court games. My eyes drifted towards the ceiling, and I noticed the secured basketball hoop tucked back out of the way. The ceiling was cavernous. You could look up through the wooden rafters to the gloomy underside of the corrugated metal roof. Oh my, look at that. My friend Jody spoke quietly and covertly nudged me. I brought my attention back to the lectern at the front of the hall, where our fat, middle-aged principal, Mr. Sturcombe, the gherkin, was introducing the latest batch of teachers to arrive at our school. There were 5 of them standing on the stage with him. They all looked young, straight out of university no doubt, and eager to get their country stint over and done with. There were 3 females and 2 males, and I knew immediately who Jody meant. He was dressed in black slacks and a smart button-through shirt. His hair was black as night and contrasted with the pale skin on his face. It was the high cheekbones and handsomely sculpted jaw that Jody knew I would find just as eye-catching as she did. The new teacher looked out at the assembled students as Mr. Sturcombe said, "And this is Mr. Edliv, who belongs to the science department." There was no sunlight reaching into the hall to explain what happened next, but his eyes, as they glanced over the crowd, glinted like faceted gems. The hairs on the back of my neck raised. "Nuh-uh," I said, "all yours." Jody turned her wide eyes to me in disbelief. Then Miss Marion caught our attention, and with a warning look indicated we should both shut up. I watched Mr. Edliv as he left the stage. He moved with a fluid grace that, although beautiful, was almost eerie. I wondered if I would have him for a teacher this year. Here are a couple more examples of nuanced language used with a simile and a metaphor. To touch his skin was to touch the cool, smooth surface of a reptile. In the short time my hand rested on his arm, I felt the white flesh change to the scaled hide of a serpent. And, "You are a foundling, Sylvie, left on our doorstep inside a white vessel that looked more like an egg than a baby capsule." In this example of the familiar and the unfamiliar, I have highlighted the phrases which I feel ground the reader in reality, and the ones that I think attach to that reality, making them imaginable. I have also made use of the familiar trope of the full moon and its links with the uncanny. The example reads, "It was the night of my 17th birthday, and the moon was full. The window was wide open to allow the September night air into my bedroom. I couldn't sleep and was looking at the round disk of moon. It was so bright it cast swashes of moonlight across my bed. I felt restless. It was the accumulation of the restlessness I had been feeling all week, and I didn't know what to do about it. I kicked back my bed covers, and the moonlight fell across my bare legs. It was as though I could feel the cool, dry touch of the silvery white light against my skin. I sat up and moved down the bed until I was bathed in the luminescence. My usually tan skin looked pale, and the invisible veins in my arms gradually became a brilliant blue and spread like an undulating vine over my entire body. It didn't feel unpleasant, but I was fizzing with an energy I didn't understand. As I watched the captivating network of pulsing blue, an image of Mr. Edliv came unbidden to my head. He'd told me to think of him as Conrad. He'd said our lives were intertwined, no matter if I chose to fight it. Suddenly I was tired of fighting, of being repulsed by a man that also intrigued me. The push and pull of my feelings was exhausting. I lay down, my body faintly glowing, and didn't resist as an image of Conrad formed at the end of my bed. His dark hair and pallid skin shimmered with an effervescent light. His intense gaze was fixed on me. His mouth parted, and I was surprised when his tongue flicked out because it was forked like that of a serpent. Thank you for listening to my presentation. It's been a real pleasure being able to use one of my favourite books as the text. Here are some other works by Robin McKinley, which I also recommend. I read them when I was younger, but still find them enjoyable today. Thank you for your time. Have a good day.